The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all. I am Radil Mishra and on behalf of K Ratings welcome you to our webinar on credit perspective, wholesale NBFCs, headwinds for banks turning into opportunities for NBFCs. We appreciate your time in joining us for this webinar. To take you further on this, may I introduce our speakers for today. We have with us Mr. Amod Khanorkar, Senior Director and Head Ratings at K Ratings Limited. Our second speaker for today is Mr. Mitul Budhbhatti. Mitul is working with Care Ratings as Associate Director and has over 12 years of experience in credit ratings, having handled ratings across diverse industry segments, including large corporates, banks, FIs, urban local bodies, and MSMEs. Our third speaker for today is Mr. Ravi Kumar Dasari. Ravi is working with Care Ratings as Associate Director and has an industry experience of over 10 years. He is part of the ratings team tracking the BFSI sector. I would like to inform that as always, the discussion is in form of a presentation which is visible on your screen. In case of queries, please key in the questions in the slot provided. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I repeat, in case of any queries, please key in the questions. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. May I request Mr. Amod to begin the session?
Thanks, Mridul. Good afternoon to all and welcome to the Care Ratings webinar on wholesale NBFCs. I am Amod Khanorkar and along with me I have my colleagues Mitul and Ravi Kumar. I'll briefly take you through the evolution of NBFCs along with the growing importance of NBFC sector, including that of the wholesale NBFC. And towards the end, I'll quickly touch upon the aspects that we typically look at for wholesale NBFCs to get good credit ratings. RBI started regulating companies which were accepting deposits and slowly expanded its ambit to cover the NBFC sector. And in 1997, changes were made to the RBI Act of 1934 to put in place a comprehensive regulatory mechanism for non-banking financial space company. Over the period of time, the regulations have been amended to include different type of NBFCs based on their systemic importance, asset class, and liability classification, that is deposit and non-deposit. Currently, there are 12 major categories of NBFCs, including asset finance companies, loan companies, infra, microfinance, peer-to-peer, etc. The sector has seen considerable growth along with consolidation during the changing regulatory environment with emergence of larger NBFCs which are much bigger than current day smaller private sector banks. As per the RBI data, the share of NBFCs in total credit extended by banks and NBFCs together that increased from 9.5% in as of March of 2008 to 15.5% at the end of March of 2017. Care Ratings coverage of wholesale NBFC's loan book has registered a CAGR of 23% over 15 to 17, in line with the general NBFC industry trend due to slowdown in credit growth and credit offtake from the banks. In addition, the specialized approach of the wholesale NBFCs, including the leaner structure for approvals, shorter turnaround time, customized products, all these have helped them to increase their presence in the wholesale lending segment. Going forward, frankly speaking, the space for wholesale NBFCs is wide open. We believe for them to have a strong credit rating, healthy capitalizations, which will be possibly much higher than the retail ones, maintaining the NIMs and at really good control over asset quality. These are some of the paramount factors of importance for us to look at them favorably in terms of credit rating. Now I'll hand over my hand over to Mitul for the purpose of a detailed presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. So the flow of the presentation would be, we would be covering briefly the product profile of the wholesale NBFCs with insights into the performance of each of the segments, including real estate, project finance, and corporate lending. Further on, we will also touch upon the financial performance of the wholesale NBFCs with the focus on their profitability. Within this, we will discuss about the income growth linked to portfolio performance, cost of funds to their borrowing mix, and ability of the players to manage borrowing mix, and extent of credit costs influencing the profitability. We will then discuss about the asset quality of the wholesale NBFCs. Post covering the current performance of the wholesale NBFCs, the way forward will be discussing the growth drivers and the challenges faced by the sector and the outlook on the sector. Starting with the composition of the loan portfolio of the wholesale NBFCs. So there are 13 NBFCs rated by CARE which are primarily wholesale in nature. The outstanding loan book of these NBFCs has increased from about 1.26 lakh crore in FY15 to 1.88 lakh crore in FY17. Within the loan portfolio of wholesale NBFCs, around 87% of the book is wholesale in nature and the remaining is retail. The wholesale book comprises of three main segments, including lending to real estate, corporate finance, and project finance. Lending to the corporate sector formed the major share of the outstanding portfolio at 46% in FY17, followed by project finance at 33% and real estate at 21%. We will be discussing about each of the segments in detail in the forthcoming slides, wherein we'll try to highlight the key characteristics of the segment. Some of the players are also in the process of diversifying their books from completely wholesale to a mix of wholesale and retail from a risk perspective. This has been done to reduce concentration risk that is generally associated with wholesale book because of the large ticket sizes. This apart, the diversification to retail book will also help these NBFCs to maintain NIMs as the retail segment has higher yields in comparison to the wholesale segment. However, the challenge in the retail space is in terms of developing a larger field force, risk management systems, and credit appraisal processes, which are vastly different from the wholesale lending segment. We now look at the three major wholesale lending segments in more detail, beginning with real estate. So the slide shows the real estate exposure in absolute terms of the wholesale NBFCs over the span of 3 years. This segment has witnessed significant growth not just in value but also in terms of percentage of the outstanding wholesale NBFC portfolio. It shows a YOY growth of 35% and 30% respectively for FY16 and FY17. A thing to note here is, while calculating the portfolio growth, we have not considered Piramal Finance Limited, which has a real estate portfolio of around 16,500 crore as on March 2017. However, around 12,000 crore of this portfolio was transferred from the parent Piramal Enterprises in FY17 itself. This would have skewed the result and hence excluded. Comparing the same with the banks, which had an outstanding exposure to real estate sector of 1.66 lakh crore in FY15, 1.77 lakh crore in FY16, and 1.85 lakh crore in FY17, representing a YOY growth of just 6.67% in FY16 and 4.5% in FY17. NBFCs have been playing an important role in this segment by meeting the requirements of the developers. The banks are not increasing their exposure in this segment due to relative riskier segment perception and also on account of higher risk weight allocation to this segment as compared to NBFCs. The NBFCs have been able to create a presence in this segment and have structured their products to meet the needs of the developers who are in the process of launching new projects or completing the ongoing ones. NBFCs have been able to maintain their asset quality in the inherently risky real estate sector on account of selection of the builder and the preference towards residential projects with the same set of developers and extending finance to other projects of the same builder. So the peculiar feature of these NBFCs is that they have derived comfort with a particular set of builders and they cater to their needs rather than having an exposure to a new builder. The players are structuring the deals as per the needs of the borrowers. For example, in project specific lending, in case of an early stage project, there will be a pledge of shares along with mortgage of land and structures thereon. If it is at the early stage, say last mile, at a later stage, say last mile financing, then the credit is extended by taking exclusive charge on the unsold units. Thus, such a lending is being done with adequate security coverage. Around a 2x cover in most of the cases is taken. Moving on to the project finance segment. The project finance segment has seen stress in the last few years and it has also impacted the NBFCs operating in this segment. Apart from the projects which have turned NPAs in the books of the NBFCs, which were in the earlier phase, that is prior to 2016, the lenders are not funding greenfield projects on a larger scale. The funding is being done to complete the existing projects which are experiencing cost overrun or existing lender is seeking an exit. However, these are backed by strong operating cash flows or a guarantee or some form of explicit support from a strong parent. Projects being funded are typically backed by pledge of shares of the stronger promoter entity, corporate and personal guarantees, and first charge on all project assets and cash flows. Within the project finance space, we take a closer look at the two broad segments where NBFCs are taking exposure. These are power and roads. In the power sector, exposure of the NBFCs is in the thermal power segment has seen some stress, and as a result the NBFCs are not increasing their exposure in this segment. There has been increasing focus on lending to the renewable power segment, mainly solar, which has shown growth in the past few years on the back of shorter construction period as compared to the thermal plants, relatively proven technology, and exemption from environmental clearances, which are making the projects viable and generating stable cash flows in shorter period of time. However, in the renewable segment, projects related to biomass and MSW power have not performed well and turned into NPAs in the books of NBFCs. In these cases, project counterparty selection becomes an important consideration for lending. The road sector has faced significant stress due to execution delays and stalling due to land acquisition issues, inability in achieving financial closure for the projects, and unviability of the operations due to deficit in toll collections. Majority of the projects were under public-private partnership model where aggressive bidding by the developers coupled with project delays and lower than envisaged toll collections has affected the private players negatively. The wholesale NBFCs are funding to promoters backed by strong operating cash flows from the toll projects or projects which have fixed annuity. Generally, it is being done to give an exit to the existing lender. Telecom and mining are other segments which have shown a degrowth in the portfolio of the NBFCs. Moving on to the corporate finance segment. The corporate lending segment has seen good growth in the last few years, mainly on account of lower credit growth in the banking sector. The wholesale NBFCs are able to bridge the gap and fulfill the requirements of the corporate borrowers. However, the NBFCs are not focusing on any particular sector for growth and have been concentrating on giving structured credit solutions to meet the various requirements of the promoters of various companies, including for acquisition of companies for inorganic growth, consolidation of their shareholding in the companies, and meeting the shortfall in cash flows in any one of the companies held within the group. Generally, the credit extended is for meeting such requirements and is not for regular working capital needs. Structures are put in place to ensure adequate security coverage, which include mortgage of fixed assets and pledge of listed or unlisted shares. In some cases, the NBFCs have also taken unsecured exposures based on the reputation of the promoters and strength of the group in terms of their market standing and financial position. The NBFCs have witnessed substantial prepayments during the last 3 years on account of strong competition in this segment. Thus, maintaining a book in this segment has been challenging, and the players have to constantly evolve and offer new structures to the corporates in order to ensure growth in its lending book. Next, we look at the financial performance of the wholesale NBFCs. As per RBI data, bank credit to industry has grown at a CAGR of mere 0.42% during FY15 to FY17. However, loan book of the wholesale NBFCs grew at a CAGR of 23% during the same period. The subdued growth in bank credit was mainly on account of high NPA accretion from its corporate segment. As per RBI data, large borrowers of above 5 crore account for nearly 87% of the bank's NPA as on March 2017, which made the banks, especially public sector banks, reluctant to lend to the corporate segment. Further, in line with the loan book growth, wholesale NBFC's interest income grew at a CAGR of 20% from FY15 to FY17. As given in the chart, majority of this portfolio growth is driven by real estate segment, which grew at a CAGR of 33%, followed by corporate segment with 20% growth and infra segment with 15%. The chart clearly shows that the wholesale NBFCs have been able to maintain an average interest spread of 4.4% over the past 3 years. Further, in line with the falling interest rate scenario prevailing, wholesale NBFCs yield on advances and borrowing costs both declined by about 95 basis points each during the past 3 years. The reduction in borrowing costs was mainly on account of the falling interest rates, increasing proportion of short-term market borrowings, and ability of the higher rated companies to borrow in the form borrow from debt markets at lower rates as compared to the bank borrowing. As given in the chart, the proportion of market borrowing, that is commercial paper and NCDs, increased from 48% in FY15 to 59% in FY17. Proportion of commercial paper borrowing increased from 17% in FY16 to 20% in FY17, indicating that to maintain interest spreads and competitive cost of borrowing, the NBFCs increasingly resorted to CP as a source of fund. However, this has also created some mismatches in the asset liability profile of these NBFCs. As given in the chart, the net interest margin has been maintained at an average of 3.6% over the last 3 years, mainly due to NBFC's ability to reduce the cost of borrowing in line with the yield on advances. Now turning to the profitability of the wholesale NBFCs. As seen in the chart, the return on total assets or ROTA for the wholesale NBFCs has declined by about 32 basis points to 1.38% in FY17 from 1.7% in FY15. The operating expenses as percentage of average total assets has marginally increased from 2.5% to 2.66% in FY17, whereas net interest margin has risen from 3.41% to 3.61% during the same period. Hence, the reduction in ROTA is mainly attributed to the increase in credit cost. The proportion of credit cost in total cost structure has increased from 7.5% to 13% in FY17, whereas credit cost as a percentage of average total assets has increased from 0.81% in FY15 to 1.44% in FY17. Stress in the infra segment caused some players to sharply increase provisions, with some NBFCs voluntarily increasing the provision coverage, which has impacted the profitability of the infra-focused NBFCs. Moving on to the asset quality of the wholesale NBFCs. As on March 31st, 2017, the gross NPA ratio for the wholesale NBFCs stood at 2.6% as compared to the banking sector's GNPA ratio of 9.3%. Though GNPAs of wholesale NBFCs are substantially lower than banks, majority of the loan book growth of NBFCs has happened over the past few years, which means lower seasoning with respect to the newly generated portfolio. Further, the adjusted gross NPA ratio, which is gross NPA plus other stress asset ratio for the wholesale NBFCs stood at 3.9%. As per our data, major proportion of these NPAs has accrued from the infrastructure segment. This is mainly due to many infra-focused NBFCs having substantial amount of assets in the form of security receipts and restructured assets, which are classified as stressed assets. As given in the chart, the GNPA levels have fallen by 27 basis points from 2.85% in FY15 to 2.58% in FY17, while the net NPA levels have fallen by 82 basis points from 1.98% to 1.17% in the same period. A higher fall in the net NPA levels indicates increasing provision coverage for these NBFCs. The provision coverage ratio of wholesale NBFCs increased from 30% in FY15 to 55% in FY17. I now hand over to Ravi, who will take you through the rest of the presentation.
I'll start with the growth drivers for the wholesale NBFCs. There is a growing demand from the wholesale segments, which is why the wholesale NBFCs are able to grow their books. And if you look at the way the three segments have performed in the last few years, so definitely there is a demand from the wholesale segments. On the infrastructure side, there's infrastructure requirements in the country have been projected to increase to 50 lakh crores in the next 5 years. Financing this will require bulk investment from the public sector, coupled with support from the private sector. Wholesale NBFCs are likely to play an important role in channeling funds to these segments. Now, in the infrastructure segment, road segment will continue to attract funding from the NBFCs, given the opportunities and suitably supported by the government in terms of efforts being taken for sorting land acquisition issues and introduction of hybrid annuity model to ease the cash flow issues of the players. In the power segment, there has been a rapid growth with renewable energy getting integrated with the mainstream power grids. More than half of the power capacity addition in FY18 has been in the solar and wind division. Henceforth, the power segment will continue to attract funding from the NBFCs in the renewable energy space. There could be some traction of funding towards the ports, also given government's initiative towards integration of transport across roads, railways, and ports. Telecom, mining, thermal and hydropower, biomass, and MSW-based renewable segment are likely to be avoided by the NBFCs. The next segment is the real estate segment. The wholesale NBFCs in the real estate segment will benefit from the RERA implementation, as it will increase the transparency in the sector and help the NBFCs to assess the performance of the developers in a more granular manner. In addition, it will given the control measures under RERA, including usage of funds and timelines for real estate developers, will also help the NBFCs in monitoring the asset quality more closely. It is also expected that with RERA implementation, there will be an increase in demand for the housing, as it provides enhanced transparency to the buyers and in turn will help the compliant developers to launch new projects and also address the unsold inventory in the market. We expect that the NBFCs funding developers focused on affordable housing segment to garner higher proportion in the overall new launches. Affordable housing category is also getting a boost on the back of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Further, with government focusing on smart city project plan, more funding is likely to be done in cities other than the prime metros, which will in turn result in more traction for the real estate sector. Now, there is a need for the wholesale funding apart from banks. Now, these NBFCs are providing an alternative to bank funding and supports economic growth. It also helps in diversification of credit supply from the financial sector and complements the bank. We have witnessed recently the recent growth in the wholesale NBFCs on the back of decline in banks lending, as there are high outstanding NPAs within the banking sector. So they have been able to complement the banks and in the current scenario able to support the funding requirements of various players. And the market has also been responding in a fashion wherein there is a growing demand for players who are offering customized products. These NBFCs provide products which are as per the requirement of the borrowers, unlike traditional products offered by the banks. There is an increasing demand from clients for sophisticated products, which is spurring the demand for the wholesale NBFCs. The product offerings are different from the traditional product, as they generally do not define the end usage, and the promoters or companies are freely able to use the funds for various uses including acquisition. The fourth factor is the development of the bond market, which will be positive for the NBFCs. Government is pushing for development of corporate bond market by increasing market participants, which in the long run will improve trading of bonds and liquidity of bonds. RBI also, on the other hand, is pushing large borrowers from the banking system to increase access market borrowings. It has also put in guidelines for enhancing credit supply for large borrowers through market mechanism, whereas it has specified amount of funds to be raised from the banking system. It is expected that apart from the loan book, the credit substitute of the wholesale NBFCs would see reasonable growth of the total book. Hence, development of the bond market will be positive for the NBFCs. Apart from this, they will also be aiding for the development of the bond market, as they offer structured products which will include capital market instruments based on the needs of the borrowers. Now I'll touch upon the challenges which the wholesale NBFCs are going to face on a continuous basis from here on. One is maintaining asset quality. Overall, given the concentration risk in the wholesale lending segment, NBFCs need to be cautious as few accounts getting stressed will put pressure on the overall asset quality numbers. Given the past asset quality issues in the infrastructure segment, NBFCs need to be cautious in lending to this segment. In the real estate space, given the traction in the affordable housing segment, wherein it would entail developers with lower track record of executions, NBFCs need to be cautious in this segment. We are also witnessing some increase in the gross NPA percentage in the real estate lending segment. The other challenge with the wholesale NBFCs would face is maintaining NIM in an increasing interest rate scenario. The NBFCs in the past have increased their proportion of borrowings in the short-term tenor with proportion of commercial paper to overall resource profile increasing in the last 3 years. However, this was done during a softer interest rate regime with yields hardening in the last few months. Continuing dependence on the short-term funding will impact the NIM at a faster pace as the rates will be revised at shorter intervals as compared to the loans funded by the NBFCs, which are generally of longer tenor and at fixed rates. The outlook from us is that the wholesale NBFCs are creating niche in their segment with their specialized approach and are likely to maintain their position even post banks re-entering into the segment after resolving their NPA issues. They will continue to play an important role in the financial sector, complementing the banking sector for funding the wholesale segments. The portfolio will continue to grow at a healthy 20% in the medium term, with continuous growth in the segments including real estate and corporate finance. The infra financing segment is also likely to see some traction given the government focus on the sector. Thank you so much. Now we conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Ravi, Mitul, and Amod, sir. With this, now we come to the end of the presentation. We'll be taking a break of 2 minutes before we are back with our Q&A session. You are please requested to start keying in the queries in the slot provided. I repeat, we'll be taking a break of 2 minutes before we begin a Q&A session. Thank you.
We now commence the Q&A session. The first question is from Ms. Manisha Purwal. She is asking how the government-owned power sector NBFCs will be impacted, given that they are now being considered to bail out the NPAs in the power sector. Thank you, Manisha, for the question. See, I think in terms of the government owned power NBFCs being asked to help out stressed assets. Obviously, if they are going to take those stressed assets in their own books, it's going to impact their asset quality. Unless there is a capital support from the government coming in, obviously we're going to see the asset quality of these players impacted. So obviously it has to be backed by some sort of capital support from the government if they have to do that. Then the next question is from Mr. Vinay Kedia. He is asking, what are the main factors from which you feel NBFCs are expected to perform better as compared to banks presently? Thanks, Vinay, for the question. See, we feel that the wholesale NBFCs at present, I think what is differentiating them, with the banks is their specialized approach to lending. So, for example, there are NBFCs who are focused on the real estate sector. So the kind of structuring that they are doing in terms of their deals for the sector really shows that the approach to lending is very much specialized with a very specific know-how for the sector. And that I believe could be a differentiating factor for these NBFCs vis-a-vis the banks going forward. So they tend to offer a lot of structured solution and specialized situations funding, which is kind of their forte. I hope that answers your query. The next question is from Mr. Sagar Shah, and he's asking what is the average ticket size for wholesale NBFCs in the real estate segment. Thanks, Sagar, for asking the question. In the real estate space, we have NBFCs catering to the large developers. We have NBFCs catering to the affordable segment. So for the large developers, we have seen ticket sizes of 100, 200 crores, for some of the bigger NBFCs, and in the affordable segment, the ticket sizes have been around 25 to 30 crore. It all depends upon the size of the NBFC and to what extent of capitalization that NBFC has. So typically the NBFCs which are heavily capitalized, they're the ones who are focusing on the larger developers, and they have a ticket size which is much larger in the range of around 100 to 200 crores. There's another question from Mr. Sagar Shah, who is asking, since the credit costs have gone up for NBFCs, then what is the outlook for the NBFCs in the coming years? Thanks again, Sagar. So I believe you are asking, outlook in terms of the asset quality or credit costs going forward. So what we see, today is the asset quality, stress is primarily found in the infra segment, and in terms of provisioning, the space is pretty much well provided for in the books of the NBFCs. As far as the other segments of real estate and corporate funding are concerned, the seasoning of these books is relatively low. So I believe, I mean, it really remains to be seen how, these two books will really pan out in future. Also, if we look at the real estate book, the lot of the lending has been done, where there is a moratorium involved. So we are still in that phase where we are still under, a lot of the loans are still under moratorium. So once we hit some sort of a maybe a year or a couple of years down the line, the projects to which they are funded really need to really need to perform and really need to deliver in terms of cash flows for the loans to remain good and pay back. So I think the next couple of years would be very crucial as far as the retail or the real estate NBFCs are concerned. And further, we are seeing a lot of traction in the affordable housing segment. So that is one space where we see that asset quality issues could come up because the developers being funded there would have a lower track record in terms of execution. I hope that answers your query. So there's a question from Sagar again. Is asking, with sales growth in the real estate segment hardly left after GST and demonetization, isn't the risk for NBFCs getting larger? So thanks, Sagar, again. So I think there are a couple of things here. Uh, what we are seeing is that there is virtual stagnation as far as the new launches are concerned from the developers, and there is a focus on selling the unsold inventory from the developers, and the pricing also is kind of seeing some sort of a stagnation or a bit of a correction. So given the focus on selling the unsold inventory, and with no new launches happening, we the current funding which is there could may not fall into much of a problem. And further, see, many of these real estate focused NBFCs are also kind of helping the developers to sell the unsold inventory. So that is another factor which is kind of helping them. There's a question from Mr. Raghav Khandelwal, and he's asking, increase in the interest rate by the RBI in the next policy, how it will impact the NBFC NIMS and growth, and which NBFC type is affected more? Thank you, Raghav, for the question. So yeah, I mean that is one of the challenge that we had mentioned in the presentation also, that increasing interest rates would definitely affect the NIMs of the wholesale NBFCs, and also we see that a lot of NBFCs, they resorted to the commercial paper short-term instrument for funding, where the transmission of the lower interest rate that we had seen over the years was much better there. With those yields going up, definitely there would be a pressure on NIM. As far as the type of NBFC which will be more impacted, I think definitely the wholesale. If I have to compare wholesale vis-a-vis retail, then the wholesale NBFCs will be more impacted. And within the wholesale space, I believe the infra and the real estate could be impacted. The NIMs could be impacted a bit more. In the corporate finance sector, what we are seeing is, while the loans could be extended for a longer tenor, but there is a lot of prepayments that we see in the corporate finance book. So there there would be some sort of a readjustments in the lending rates that could happen there, and perhaps the NIMs could be protected there. But definitely infra and real estate focused NBFCs, we could see some pressure on NIMs. I hope that answers your query. There is a question from Mr. Chandan Gehlot. He's asking, what should be the credit cost for wholesale NBFC over a cycle? Thank you, Chandan, for asking that. So as things stands, the GNPA, the adjusted GNPA number, that if you look at including the stressed assets, that's coming to around 4%. So with the infra segment posing a higher ratio vis-a-vis the real estate and the corporate book. So on an average, it's around 4%. If I have to look at over a cycle, maybe I think the assumption of 4 to 5% is something that we can consider. There's a question from Mr. Lakshmikant, and is asking, how has the trend been for rating upgrades for wholesale NBFCs from 2015 to 2017? Thank you, Lakshmikant, for asking that. So, if you look at last few years, we have seen, quite a few upgrades happening with hardly any downgrades. And the key reason for upgrades in the wholesale NBFC space has been the capitalization. So we have seen a lot of capital coming in, and these NBFCs getting heavily capitalized, and that kind of sets the platform for them not only to grow but also to absorb any losses which could come on account of the concentrated exposure. So yeah, in terms of ratings, there have been upgrades primarily driven by infusion of capital. So another question from Mr. Lakshmikant, and he wants to know what is the outlook for rating upgrades in the coming year. So thanks again. So I think we can talk about the overall outlook for the wholesale NBFCs. I think it's largely going to remain stable. As we have seen, a lot of capital infusion happening. There is more capital infusion which is expected going forward. Uh, and so it remains to be now it remains to be seen what kind of growth they are able to achieve in the various segments they are operating into, and what kind of asset quality numbers they are going to put up. But by and large, many of these NBFCs appear to be fairly well capitalized, and the year should be by and large stable from a ratings perspective. Thank you.
Fine. I think we are out of time, and it'll be ending our Q&A session for now. What I suggest is for the pending queries, you can please write to us in the feedback box, which will be coming no sooner we end the webinar. We'll be replying on email individually to you. Thanks again for taking your time out and being a part of this Care Ratings webinar. We hope the discussion was insightful and would look forward to your suggestions and participation in future also. Thank you so much.